Sometimes, even when you feel like something's wrong, it takes a while to admit it to yourself. That morning, when I woke up to the sound of water running from the bathroom, I felt this strange unease inside me. But as usual, I pushed it aside. Emil was in the bathroom. He used the same toothpaste, shaved at the same speed. But me. I was becoming more and more of a stranger to him every day. I had memorized his steps, but I no longer knew what was going on inside him. My name is Hannah. I'm 34. After years of consulting in the finance sector, I had finally started my own software company and was slowly but surely finding success. But my marriage. On the outside, it looked perfect, but it was filled with cracks on the inside. Emil was a senior partner at a big law firm. From the outside, he looked successful, polite, and loving. But for a while, I'd had this feeling that there was another face behind that mask. Late nights at the office, his phone always on silent, and those short business trips he took without telling me. They say a woman's instinct is never wrong. And one morning, everything started with a notification on Emil's phone while he was in the shower. It said, Scheidungsplan finale version, meaning divorce plan, final version. The sender was familiar, Emil's assistant Lara. My heart started pounding. This had to be a mistake. Maybe it was meant for a different file. Maybe. But the voice inside me had already confirmed it. Emil was planning a divorce. And he was doing it secretly, behind my back, methodically. My fingers trembled as I reached for the phone. It wasn't just that message. There were dozens of emails, texts, and files sent in the past. Emil and his lawyer friend Stefan had been planning everything for weeks. Property division, transferring the house, even software licenses for my company that Emil secretly wanted to take over. I froze. What I felt wasn't a sharp pain in my chest, but a cold, clear clarity. There was no fear. Only one thought remained. I didn't start this fight, but I will finish it. The next day, I quietly made my move. My first task was to review the entire ownership structure of my company. I secretly set up a meeting with my company's lawyer. I trusted him completely. Klaus had been working with me for years, and he knew how to keep a secret. Before telling him anything, I handed over all the documents. What we need to do is legally secure every corner of this company, I said, and we need to do it right now. Emil had no idea. At home, he was still smiling and sipping his coffee, calling me darling just like before. But now, I knew that every word he said had an agenda behind it. And every night, as I lay next to him in that bed, the only thing running through my mind was, how far had he gone? Did he really want to wipe me out and rebuild his life? Late at night, sitting at my computer, I was building a wall with the documents in my hands. I was dismantling the trap Emil was trying to set for me in a way he would never understand, quietly but determinedly preparing my counterattack, not missing a single detail. In a week, I transferred all my personal assets into anonymous security funds. The management structure of my company changed. Legal loopholes were closed. And most importantly, all of this took place within the legal system Emil thought he was an expert in, right under his nose. But the biggest surprise hadn't come yet. At home, everything seemed to continue as if nothing was wrong. Emil would get dressed in the mornings and go to work, while I'd stop by my company's office and then quietly return home. But now, this house was a stage. Every gesture, every glance was part of an illusion. Our conversations were short and superficial, but in my mind, every step Emil took had a countermove. He still thought he was in control, but I had already flipped the game board over. One evening, Emil came home a little later than usual. He slowly took off his jacket and laid it on the desk. He had shopping bags in his hands, filled with wine and gourmet cheeses. "Let's have a nice dinner tonight," he said. He looked into my eyes, and in that moment, I remembered exactly what I was facing. It was a face masked by guilt. He was acting like he was doing me one last favor, but deep inside, he was already planning the timing of the divorce papers. During dinner, he asked, "You've been a little distracted lately. Is everything okay?" How strange it was. Watching his fake concern didn't make me angry. It only strengthened me. I placed a calm smile on my face. "Everything's fine. What could be wrong as long as I'm with you?" My words were like needles. And as he swallowed them, he smiled, but I saw the pain in his throat. That night, When Emil retreated to his office, I jumped when I heard an email notification on my phone in the kitchen. It was from Klaus. The company's new security contracts were completed. All software licenses were re-registered through a third-party organization, and the assets had been split into anonymous investment portfolios. In short, all of Emil's planned legal traps had now backfired. But that wasn't all. Emil had apparently set up a perfect plan. In 2 weeks, the divorce case would be filed, the media would be kept quiet, and documents would be delivered incomplete to steal my assets. Worse, he would come to me with fake claims that certain intellectual properties of my company were actually financed by Emil. And these claims would be backed up by documents prepared by Lara. What a coincidence! I had already seen those documents. The next day, I had a casual encounter with Lara. When I dropped by Emil's office, Lara avoided my gaze when she saw me. But I smiled warmly. "I brought a file for Emil. You must be really busy," I said. My voice was calm, but my eyes were closely studying her. The slight tension in her shoulders, her hurriedness when she placed the file on the desk, it was showing me how lies leave traces on the body. The game they were playing together was cardboard, and I was setting fire to every corner of it. That evening, Klaus took me to a secret archive. Inside, there were old versions of contracts Emil had been trying to use to frame me with fake documents, and one of them contained a serious mistake. Emil had made an unauthorized transfer with a forged signature. This wasn't just a legal issue, but also a criminal liability. In that moment, a spark lit up in my mind. Now, I wasn't just protecting myself. I was going to turn every move he made against me into his own downfall. And I would do it without saying a single word. That night, Emil approached me and said, "Hannah, you know I love you, right?" I looked into his eyes. There was no love in them, only strategy. "Of course I know," I replied. "I love you too." But I didn't finish the sentence. Because in that moment, I knew that just 1 week later, I would turn that sentence into the biggest one in his life. And Emil still had no idea. Since the day I saw the final version of the divorce plan, each passing day had been like a carefully placed move in a chess game. I moved quietly, watching Emil's every move, scanning every signature I'd ever made, investigating the gaps in each step we took together. While I maintained a calm exterior, I had already secured all my assets and layered the ownership of my company in legal structures Emil couldn't touch. But I knew Emil wasn't someone who would give up easily. His arrogance always made him think he was one step ahead, and now, that arrogance was starting to slip beneath his feet. That morning, I left the house early. Before I left, I attached a secret note to Emil's car window. It simply said, "I know everything, but you still have time." There was no signature. It was written in unfamiliar handwriting. It was the spark that would plant the first seed of doubt in Emil's mind. All day, he would wonder what to do, who to trust. On the game board, it wasn't just the moves that mattered anymore. Emotions had also become my weapon. That afternoon, Klaus called me to a private meeting. He had a flash drive in his hand. "This is an excerpt from Lara's internal company communications," he said. It was leaked. Legally, it might be difficult to present in court, but strategically, it's an incredibly strong card. When I opened the contents, my eyes widened. In an email Lara had sent to Emil, she wrote, "If Hannah notices the documents, we need to switch to Plan B. We must make sure there's no written trace of anything going through your hands." This proved that the plan wasn't just unethical, it was also illegal. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't scared anymore. The world Emil was trying to build was about to collapse on him. But I wasn't going to rush. I needed to wait just a little longer. This time, it wasn't about victory, it was about justice. The next evening, Emil's face was tense at dinner. His eyes kept darting around. "You've been a bit too busy lately, Hannah. Is everything okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Everything. Perfect," I replied. My words echoed in the cold room. Emil didn't respond. Silence is the most suffocating cell for a criminal. And now, he was trapped in that cell. That night at 2:30 a.m., I quietly entered Emil's study. A document left open on the desk caught my attention. It was from a law firm letterhead, Schneller and Amp, Raymond LLP. The sender, Stefan. Subject: Final assessment. Legal process against Hannah. My heart skipped a beat. Emil was about to start the divorce proceedings. But as I read further, the smile returned to my face. Stefan still thought my property was listed with old information. But all those documents had already been rendered obsolete. But the most shocking part came at the end of the document, a small note in Lara's handwriting. Hannah might be smarter than she seems. Watch the process carefully. So, they had suspected. But it was too late. Because I had already finished everything. I had transferred all my software rights to an independent tech consortium abroad. All my personal assets had been restructured in a way that would make them impossible to present as evidence in court, but they would legally remain mine. Moreover, thanks to Lara's communications, Emil's plans were now crumbling, not just on a moral level, but legally as well. The only thing left was the final confrontation. The next morning, when Emil came downstairs for breakfast, I was waiting at the kitchen table. In front of him was a pile of 2 envelopes. The first was a summary of all the documents I had prepared. The second was another envelope. Inside was a copy of the complaint letter, prepared to be sent to the ethics committee chairman at Emil's firm. Emil looked at the file. "What's this, Hannah?" I stared him in the eye and spoke slowly, quietly. "It's time for you to be honest with me, because I've already passed the honesty test, and you failed." Emil took the file in his hands and started flipping through the pages quickly. His face went pale, his lips dried up, and in that moment, for the first time, he realized he had truly lost. But that was just the beginning. As Emil flipped through the documents, his hands trembled. Every sentence between the pages was slowly cracking the foundation of the world he had built. His eyes darted around in panic, his mouth dry. He wanted to say something in that moment, but he had to swallow the words that came to his mind. Because the woman standing in front of him was no longer the Hannah he once knew. The woman in front of him was no longer a betrayed, deceived, and belittled wife. She was someone with strategic intelligence who could foresee every move her enemy would make, silently gathering strength, and now stepping into the scene at the right moment. As I watched Emil, I felt a sense of peace inside me. This peace wasn't a pleasure born from his pain or the misery he was in. It was the approaching footsteps of justice. For years, he had forced me into silence, controlled me under the guise of marriage, made me his only option. And now, he was tearing it all down with his own hands. And I had never screamed, never thrown tantrums. Because the biggest weakness of men like him was this: they never took a silent woman seriously. "What do these all mean?" Emil finally said. His voice was shaky, and for the first time, I heard him sounding so fragile. "These documents, how did you—" I slowly stood up. I walked across to face him. "Are you talking about these? This is the collapse plan for the system you built to destroy me, Emil. But this time, your signature isn't there. Only mine is. And I know how to make something new rise from every trace I leave behind." Emil didn't leave the house that day. He locked himself in his office and spent hours making phone calls. He called his lawyer, Stefan, 4 times, but I knew everything, because Lara was no longer by his side. A few days ago, I secretly called Lara and spoke with her face to face. She had resisted at first, but when she found out the documents she held were fake, she panicked. "If this goes to court, I'll be disbarred," she said. "I only did it because he asked me to." I didn't silence her. I just recorded what she said. A few days later, Emil's lawyer made me an unofficial offer. "Let's close this quietly. Keep it from the public, and the company won't suffer," he said. But there was no turning back now, because Emil hadn't just deceived me. He had turned into an abuser hiding behind the system, using his position for his own gain. And there had to be a price for that. I showed the independent journalist I worked with the legal trap Emil had set and the documents. When the story, titled "The Silent Power of a Woman, the High-Profile Lawyer's Wife Exposes the Secret Divorce Plan," was published, the media was shaken. Emil's company was placed under investigation by the ethics committee. Shareholders started applying pressure, and the reputation he had spent years building started to crumble in seconds. But the real blow came from Lara's statement. Her written declaration given in front of a notary clearly revealed Emil had designed the plan, manipulated the documents, and aimed to corner me both financially and legally. Even Stefan pulled back after seeing this statement. No lawyer would volunteer to defend Emil now. He was a man left alone by his own arrogance. The atmosphere in the house had completely changed. The grand dining rooms, the silent lounges, the expensive paintings, they all now only echoed. Emil became silent every morning. He avoided eye contact. I, on the other hand, kept my silence. Because silence was no longer weakness, it was a form of power. And he realized this far too late. A week later, a call came from the court. Emil's authority within the company was temporarily suspended. That day, he tried to approach me in the hallway, maybe to say something. But I kept walking. Because I was the one with a story to tell in the past, and now there was only one way for me to move forward. And that day, I stopped at the entrance door of my own house and took a deep breath. This war was over. But victory doesn't just define the winner. Victory is when character doesn't disappear, even in the darkest moments. As the day of the trial approached, it felt like the air in the city itself had changed. Emil's name was now just a whisper in the most prestigious circles of the business world. Once at the top of every guest list, he had now become a figure no one dared to be seen with openly. People either spoke his name in a hushed voice or didn't mention it at all. Because when power is lost, loneliness shows its sharpest face. Hannah, on the other hand, felt more visible than ever before. But this visibility wasn't a show. It was the right of a soul, suppressed for years, to finally make room for itself. On the day of the trial, Hannah wore a simple black dress. It was understated. But her walk, her gaze, and her posture, all of them were as striking as an act of rebellion. Her very presence now represented a woman who stood silently, but firmly, in front of justice. When she entered the courtroom, Emil noticed her. The lines on his face were deeper, the gray in his hair more pronounced. The man who had once looked down on Hannah now couldn't even meet her eyes. A temporary lawyer sat next to him because Stefan had long since abandoned the case. The lawyer's hands were shaky. Hannah's documents, witness statements, and digital records were so thorough that even defending himself would be a loss in itself. As the judge examined the pile of documents, he lifted his head and spoke a single sentence. This case is not just about divorce. It is a case of character. In that moment, there was a deep silence in the courtroom. Hannah didn't bow her head. Emil, on the other hand, clung to his notes with trembling hands. Laura's statement, the forged signatures on documents that weren't even hers, false declarations, they were all laid before them. Each one was marked by the mistakes Emil made while writing his own story. When Hannah began to speak, there was no anger in her voice. She didn't shout or accuse. She simply told her story. I tried to protect this marriage. If not love, at least I tried to preserve respect. But I realized that some people only open spaces for you to be used. Emil saw me as a threat because I was silent. But silence is just the calm before a storm, and this storm turned into a confrontation with his conscience. Everyone in the room was holding their breath. Emil didn't say anything. He couldn't. Because the truth silently brought down even the thickest walls. The court ruled in Hannah's favor. Due to Emil's financial manipulations, all ownership rights were returned to Hannah. Moreover, Emil would face a separate legal process for forgery and evidence tampering. But in Hannah's eyes, this was just a result. The justice she wanted had already been achieved long before. After the trial, journalists approached Hannah with microphones. "Do you consider this a victory, Miss Hannah?" Hannah paused. She smiled lightly. "No, this is a beginning." That day, Hannah didn't just win a case. She earned the right to turn her silence into words. Emil, however, was left under the weight of the power that a single woman had grown quietly through her silence. That evening, when Hannah returned to her home for the first time, she stood in the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. She looked out the window. The sky was clear and bright. She closed her eyes. There was no war anymore. There was no hiding anymore. There was only Hannah now. A woman standing on her own feet, holding her own life. And the next morning, while Emil was still preparing for his legal process, Hannah boarded a plane. to a new country, a new beginning. She was no longer his wife. She was now simply Hannah. As the day of the trial drew closer, it felt as though the very air in the city had changed. Emil's name had become nothing more than a whisper in the most prestigious circles of the business world. Once, at the top of every guest list, he had now become a figure no one dared to be seen with openly. People either spoke his name in hushed tones or didn't mention it at all. Because when power is lost, loneliness shows its sharpest face. Hannah, on the other hand, for the first time, felt more visible than ever before. But this visibility wasn't a show. It was the right of a soul, suppressed for years, to finally make room for itself. On the day of the trial, Hannah wore a simple black dress. It was understated. But her walk, her gaze, her posture, all of them were as striking as an act of rebellion. Her very presence now represented a woman who silently but firmly stood in front of justice. When she entered the courtroom, Emil noticed her. The lines on his face were deeper, the gray in his hair more pronounced. The man who had once looked down on Hannah now couldn't even meet her eyes. A temporary lawyer sat next to him because Stefan had long since abandoned the case. The lawyer's hands were shaky. Hannah's documents, witness statements, and digital records were so thorough that even defending himself would be a loss in itself. As the judge examined the pile of documents, he lifted his head and spoke a single sentence. This case is not just about divorce. It is a case of character. In that moment, there was a deep silence in the courtroom. Hannah didn't bow her head. Emil, on the other hand, clung to his notes with trembling hands. Laura's statement, the forged signatures on documents that weren't even hers, false declarations, they were all laid before them. Each one was marked by the mistakes Emil made while writing his own story. When Hannah began to speak, there was no anger in her voice. She didn't shout or accuse. She simply told her story. I tried to protect this marriage. If not love, at least I tried to preserve respect. But I realized that some people only open spaces for you to be used. Emil saw me as a threat because I was silent. But silence is just the calm before a storm, and this storm turned into a confrontation with his conscience. Everyone in the room was holding their breath. Emil didn't say anything. He couldn't. Because the truth silently brought down even the thickest walls. The court ruled in Hannah's favor. Due to Emil's financial manipulations, all ownership rights were returned to Hannah. Moreover, Emil would face a separate legal process for forgery and evidence tampering. But in Hannah's eyes, this was just a result. The justice she wanted had already been achieved long before. After the trial, journalists approached Hannah with microphones. Do you consider this a victory, Miss Hannah? Hannah paused. She smiled lightly. No, this is a beginning. That day, Hannah didn't just win a case. She earned the right to turn her silence into words. Emil, however, was left under the weight of the power that a single woman had grown quietly through her silence. That evening, when Hannah returned to her home for the first time, she stood in the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. She looked out the window. The sky was clear and bright. She closed her eyes. There was no war anymore. There was no hiding anymore. There was only Hannah now, a woman standing on her own feet, holding her own life. And the next morning, while Emil was still preparing for his legal process, Hannah boarded a plane. To a new country, a new beginning. She was no longer his wife. She was now simply Hannah. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. In every new story, we continue to explore courage, rebirth, and the echoes of silent strength together. Share your thoughts with us in the comments, because every word could light the way for another journey. See you in the next story.